Case 1, Pearl Fernandez. May 8, 2013, Palmdale, California, Los Angeles County. On May 22, 2013, emergency responders rushed to a modest apartment in Palmdale, California, answering a frantic 911 call. What they found inside would haunt them forever. 8-year-old Gabriel Fernandez lay motionless on the floor, his small body covered in bruises, burns, and wounds that told a story of prolonged, systematic torture. He wasn't breathing. His skull had been fractured. BB pellets were embedded in his skin. Cigarette burns marked his body like a grotesque constellation. The paramedics worked frantically, but Gabriel never regained consciousness. He was pronounced brain dead at the hospital and taken off life support 2 days later. The person who made that 911 call was Pearl Fernandez, Gabriel's own mother. But she wasn't calling for help out of concern. She was calling because her torture had finally gone too far. The investigation revealed a horror story that had been unfolding for months. Gabriel had been forced to eat cat litter and his own vomit. He was locked in a small cabinet, bound and gagged for hours. He was beaten with baseball bats, belts, and fists. He was shot with a BB gun for fun. He was forced to wear girls' clothing to school and called gay slurs by his own mother and her boyfriend, Socorro. What made Gabriel's case even more tragic was that it could have been prevented. Teachers, family members, and social workers had reported the abuse multiple times. There were 8 separate reports to the Los Angeles County Department of Children and Family Services, but each time, Gabriel was left in his mother's custody. The case files painted a picture of a broken system. Social workers failed to properly investigate. Reports were dismissed or downplayed. Red flags were ignored, and Gabriel paid the ultimate price. Pearl Fernandez's trial revealed the depth of her cruelty. Witnesses testified about her sadistic treatment of her son. She had admitted to police that she knew Aguera was abusing Gabriel but did nothing to stop it. In fact, she participated. During one horrific incident just days before Gabriel's death, Pearl held her son down while Aguera beat him. Gabriel begged his mother to stop, pleaded for mercy, but none came. The prosecution argued that Pearl's actions constituted first-degree murder with special circumstances, torture. The defense claimed she had been influenced by Aguera and suffered from depression and personality disorders, but the evidence was overwhelming. In February 2018, Pearl Fernandez pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and admitted to the torture special circumstance. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She would spend the rest of her days behind bars, which seemed like small justice for the short life of suffering she had inflicted on her son. Socorro was convicted separately and sentenced to death, currently awaiting execution on California's death row. Gabriel's case sparked outrage across California and the nation. It led to reforms in the child welfare system, criminal charges against 4 social workers, and a Netflix documentary that brought his story to millions. But no reform, no sentence, no documentary could bring Gabriel back. His siblings, who also suffered abuse, were placed in the care of relatives. His room, filled with the few toys he owned, became a shrine to a childhood stolen. Pearl Fernandez became a symbol of evil in California, a mother who not only failed to protect her child but actively participated in his torture and murder. In a state with thousands of child abuse cases, Gabriel's story stood out for its sheer brutality and the complete absence of maternal instinct or compassion. Today, Gabriel Fernandez's name lives on in legislation, in advocacy work, and in the hearts of those who never met him but were moved by his story. His short life reminds us that evil can wear the face of a parent, and that vigilance in protecting children must never waver. If this case affected you, take a moment to like this video, share your thoughts respectfully in the comments below, and hit that subscribe button for true crime silent files. Your engagement helps us continue to shine a light on these important stories and honor victims like Gabriel. Case 2. Theresa Knorr, Francine. July 16, 1984. Placer County, California. For years, Theresa Knorr was just another resident of Sacramento, California, a mother of 6 children living a seemingly ordinary life. But behind the walls of her home, she was orchestrating a reign of terror that would result in the deaths of at least 2 of her children and the severe abuse of the others. The case first came to light in a shocking way. In November 1992, one of Theresa's daughters, Theresa Knorr, walked into a police station in Utah and made a confession that would unravel years of hidden horror. She told investigators about the torture and murder of her siblings at the hands of their own mother. The story she told seemed almost unbelievable, but as detectives investigated, they discovered it was all too real. Theresa Knorr's descent into violence began in the late 1970s and escalated through the 1980s. She was a paranoid, controlling woman who believed her daughters were possessed by demons or working against her. She subjected them to beatings, starvation, and psychological torture. Her daughter Susan Marlin Knorr bore the brunt of her mother's rage. In 1982, Theresa became convinced that Susan had placed a curse on her. In a fit of paranoid fury, Theresa shot Susan in the back. But instead of calling for help, she forced her sons to dig the bullet out of their sister's body with a knife, without anesthesia or medical care. Susan survived this nightmare, but her mother's torture continued. She was kept locked in a closet, starved, and denied basic hygiene. The bullet wound became infected, and Susan's health deteriorated rapidly. In July 1984, Theresa decided Susan was too much of a burden. She ordered her sons, Howard and Robert, to take their sister to the mountains. The boys, terrified of their mother, complied. They drove Susan, barely conscious and burning with fever from infection, to a remote area in the Sierra Nevada mountains near Squaw Valley. There, on July 16, 1984, they left her in the back seat of a car, doused the vehicle with gasoline, and set it on fire, with Susan still inside. Susan's remains were found months later, burned beyond recognition. Authorities initially treated the case as a Jane Doe, unable to identify the victim or determine exactly what had happened. It would be years before the truth emerged. But Theresa wasn't finished. In 1985, another daughter, Sheila Gay Sanders, suffered a similar fate. Theresa had subjected Sheila to the same abuse as Susan: beatings, starvation, and torture. She even attempted to perform an exorcism on the teenager. When Sheila became too weak and sick to function, Theresa decided to get rid of her too. She forced her sons to take Sheila to a remote location where she was abandoned. Sheila's body was found in June 1985 in a remote area of Sacramento County. Like Susan, she remained unidentified for years. The surviving children lived in constant terror. Terry and her brother were eventually able to escape their mother's control, but they carried deep psychological scars. For years, they were too afraid to speak out. Theresa had threatened to kill them if they ever told anyone what had happened. It wasn't until November 1992, when Terry finally found the courage to go to the police, that the truth came out. She provided investigators with detailed accounts of the abuse, the murders, and where the bodies might be found. The investigation that followed shocked even seasoned homicide detectives. They traced Theresa's movements through California, interviewed surviving family members, and matched the Jane Doe cases to Theresa's murdered daughters. Theresa Knorr was arrested in November 1993 in Salt Lake City, Utah, where she had been living under a different name. She initially denied everything, but as evidence mounted, her story began to crumble. At trial, prosecutors presented a case of systematic torture and murder driven by paranoia, mental illness, and sadistic cruelty. Witnesses testified about the horrific conditions in the Knorr household. The surviving children recounted years of abuse. The physical evidence, including forensic analysis of the victims' remains, corroborated their accounts. In October 1995, Theresa Knorr pleaded guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of conspiracy to commit murder, and 2 counts of special circumstances, torture. She was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms in prison without the possibility of parole. During her sentencing, Theresa showed little remorse. She blamed her children, claimed she had been the victim, and minimized her role in their deaths. But the court saw through her manipulation. The case of Theresa Knorr became one of the most disturbing in California history, not just because of the murders, but because of the prolonged torture her children endured, and the fact that she enlisted her own sons in her crimes, forcing them to become accomplices to their sisters' deaths. The psychological impact on the surviving children was profound. They struggled with guilt, trauma, and the knowledge that their mother, the person who should have protected them, had been their greatest tormentor. Theresa Knorr remains incarcerated today, a cautionary tale of how mental illness, unchecked cruelty, and a broken family system can lead to unspeakable tragedy. Her case has been featured in numerous true crime books and documentaries, serving as a reminder that evil can hide in plain sight, even in a mother's face. If you're finding value in these important stories, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to True Crime Silent Files. Leave a respectful comment below with your thoughts, and let's continue to honor these victims by never forgetting their stories. Case 3, Socorro. October 22, 1999, Northridge, California, Los Angeles County. The phone call came in the early morning hours of October 22, 1999. A woman's voice, calm and measured, told the 911 dispatcher that she had just shot her 3 sons as they slept. Then she had shot herself. Police rushed to the Northridge apartment and found a scene of calculated murder. 3 boys, 8-year-old Sergio, 5-year-old John, and 11-year-old Michael, lay dead in their beds, each shot in the head at close range. Their mother, Socorro Caro, was still alive, suffering from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to her chest. As paramedics worked to save her life, detectives began piecing together what had happened. What they discovered was a premeditated act of revenge that used children as weapons. Socorro Caro had been separated from her husband. The marriage had been troubled, marked by arguments about infidelity, money, and the children's welfare. Socorro believed her husband was having an affair and planning to leave her permanently. In her mind, the ultimate way to hurt him wasn't to harm herself. It was to destroy what he loved most, his sons. Over the days leading up to the murders, Socorro had been planning. She purchased a handgun legally, passing all background checks despite her deteriorating mental state. She told no one of her intentions. She appeared calm to neighbors and family members, giving no indication of what was to come. On the night of October 21st, she put her 3 boys to bed as usual. They brushed their teeth, said their prayers, and climbed under their covers, completely unaware that these would be their final moments. Once they were asleep, Socorro retrieved the gun. She went to each child's room in turn. She stood over their sleeping forms and fired a single shot into each of their heads. They died instantly, never knowing what had happened. Then, in what appeared to be a failed suicide attempt, Socorro shot herself in the chest. But unlike her sons, she survived. When police questioned her at the hospital, Socorro was remarkably forthcoming. She admitted to the murders and explained her reasoning. She wanted to punish her husband. She wanted him to feel the pain she felt. She wanted to take away his children so he would have nothing. There was no remorse in her words, only satisfaction that she had accomplished her goal. The community was horrified. Here were 3 innocent children, boys with their whole lives ahead of them, murdered in cold blood by their own mother while they slept in their beds, the one place they should have felt safest. Socorro Caro was arrested and charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder with special circumstances. The prosecution argued this was a clear case of premeditated murder motivated by revenge. The defense attempted to argue that Socorro had been suffering from depression and was not in her right mind. But the evidence told a different story. The planning, the gun purchase, the methodical execution of each child, and Socorro's own statements showed this was not an impulsive act of a disturbed mind. It was cold-blooded murder. In March 2001, Socorro Caro was convicted on all counts. The jury deliberated for less than a day. The judge sentenced her to 3 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole, ensuring she would never walk free. During the trial, family members of the murdered boys testified about their grief and loss. The father, whom Socorro had sought to punish, spoke about the emptiness left by his son's absence. He described Michael's love of soccer, Sergio's bright smile, and John's infectious laugh. Those memories were all that remained of 3 boys whose lives were stolen by the person who gave them life. The case of Socorro Caro became a symbol of how parental revenge can turn children into casualties. It raised questions about domestic violence, mental health screening for gun purchases, and how to identify parents who might harm their children. Psychologists who studied the case noted that Socorro exhibited traits common in family annihilators, individuals who kill their own family members as a final act of control or revenge. These cases often involve a narcissistic personality, a sense of ownership over family members, and a desire to hurt a partner by destroying what they love. Socorro Caro showed all these traits. To her, her sons weren't individual human beings with their own right to life. They were possessions, tools to be used in her war against her husband. When they were no longer useful to her, she disposed of them. Today, Socorro Caro remains in the California women's prison system. She has reportedly shown little remorse for her actions and has been denied parole multiple times. She will almost certainly die in prison. The 3 boys are buried together in a cemetery in Los Angeles County. Their grave marker bears their names and dates, lives that barely began before being cut short by maternal evil. Please take a moment to like this video if you're finding these stories important. Hit that subscribe button for true crime silent files and leave your respectful thoughts in the comments below. These stories matter, and your engagement helps us continue to tell them. Case 4, Heather Barron. June 20, 2018, Lancaster, California, Los Angeles County. 10-year-old Anthony Avalos had a smile that could light up a room. He loved superheroes, especially Batman. He loved his siblings. He loved school, where teachers described him as sweet, kind, and eager to please. But Anthony's home life was anything but heroic. Behind the doors of his Lancaster apartment, he was living a nightmare, and his mother, Heather Barron, was orchestrating it. On June 20, 2018, emergency responders received a call from Heather reporting that Anthony wasn't breathing. When paramedics arrived, they found the 10-year-old boy unresponsive, his body covered in bruises, burns, and wounds consistent with prolonged abuse. Anthony was rushed to the hospital, but it was too late. He was pronounced dead the following day. The official cause of death was severe head trauma and malnutrition. The medical examiner's report documented a litany of injuries, bruises in various stages of healing, burns, signs of being struck repeatedly, and evidence of neglect. This wasn't an accident, this was torture. Detectives immediately focused on Heather Barron and her boyfriend, Kareem Leva, who lived in the home with Anthony and his siblings. As they investigated, a horrifying pattern of abuse emerged. Anthony had been subjected to months of systematic torture. He was forced to kneel on uncooked rice for hours, a punishment so painful it left permanent marks on his knees. He was held upside down and dropped on his head repeatedly. He was beaten with belts, cords, and hands. He was denied food and forced to stay in his room for extended periods. Heather and Karim would pour hot sauce in Anthony's mouth and tape it shut. They would force him to do exercises until he collapsed from exhaustion. They would wake him in the middle of the night to beat him. And worst of all, they would make Anthony's siblings watch, using him as an example of what would happen if they misbehaved. Like Gabriel Fernandez before him, also from Lancaster, Anthony's abuse had been reported to authorities multiple times. Teachers noticed bruises. Family members expressed concern. There were at least 16 reports made to the Los Angeles County Department of Children and Family Services over the years regarding the Avalos children. But each time, Anthony was left in his mother's care. Social workers either didn't follow up adequately or believed Heather's explanations for her son's injuries. The system failed Anthony just as it had failed Gabriel, and the result was the same: a child dead at the hands of his own mother. The investigation revealed that Heather had specifically targeted Anthony. She told police and witnesses that she believed he was gay, and she tortured him because of it. She called him homophobic slurs. She punished him for behavior she deemed insufficiently masculine. She isolated him from his siblings and denied him affection. Her boyfriend, Karim, not only participated in the abuse but often initiated it. The two fed off each other's cruelty, escalating the violence until it reached a fatal conclusion. In June 2020, Heather Barron and Karim Leva were both charged with murder and torture. The prosecution sought the death penalty for both defendants, arguing that their actions constituted the most heinous form of child abuse. The trial, which concluded in September 2023, was emotionally devastating. Witnesses testified about Anthony's suffering. His siblings described the abuse they witnessed and endured. Teachers explained how they had tried to help but felt powerless. Medical experts detailed the extensive injuries Anthony had sustained. The jury heard recordings of Anthony calling 911 himself, begging for help, saying his mother and her boyfriend were hurting him. But those calls, like so many other warning signs, hadn't led to intervention. After weeks of testimony, the jury found both Heather Barron and Karim Leva guilty of first-degree murder with special circumstances of torture. They also convicted both on multiple counts of child abuse against Anthony's siblings. In December 2023, both were sentenced. Heather Barron received life in prison without the possibility of parole. Karim Leva also received life without parole. The death penalty was ultimately not imposed, but both will spend the rest of their lives behind bars. During sentencing, the judge addressed both defendants directly, telling them their actions represented a complete betrayal of the most sacred duty a parent has, to protect their child. The judge noted that Anthony had been utterly helpless, trapped in a home with the people who should have loved him, but instead tortured him to death. Anthony's siblings, now in foster care, are receiving counseling and support, but they will carry the trauma of what they witnessed for the rest of their lives. The case sparked renewed calls for reform in California's child welfare system. How could another Lancaster child die of abuse so soon after Gabriel Fernandez? Why weren't the reports of abuse taken seriously? What changes needed to be made to prevent future tragedies? Legislation was introduced requiring better training for social workers, more thorough investigations of abuse reports, and accountability for failures in the system. But for Anthony, these changes came too late. Today, Anthony Avalos is remembered not just as a victim, but as a catalyst for change. His story, like Gabriel's, forced California to confront uncomfortable truths about how it protects its most vulnerable citizens. Heather Barron, once a mother, is now inmate number W99214 in the California Women's Prison System. She is housed separately from the general population for her own safety, as prisoners who harm children are targets of violence even behind bars. She will never again have the opportunity to harm a child. But she also took away Anthony's opportunity to grow up, to achieve his dreams, to become the person he was meant to be. If these stories are resonating with you, please like this video, subscribe to True Crime Silent Files, and share your respectful thoughts in the comments. Your engagement helps ensure these victims are never forgotten. Case 5. Ramaraju. April 2, 2024. Santa Ana, California, Orange County. Disneyland is supposed to be the happiest place on earth, a place where children's dreams come true and families create cherished memories. For 11-year-old son of Saritha Ramaraju, it became the last happy day of his short life. On April 1, 2024, Saritha Ramaraju checked into a hotel in Santa Ana, California, with her 11-year-old son after spending the day at Disneyland. Security footage showed them entering the hotel together, the boy still wearing his Disneyland merchandise, excited from a day at the theme park. Less than 24 hours later, that boy would be dead, killed by his own mother in that hotel room. On the morning of April 2nd, housekeeping staff entered the room for routine cleaning. What they found sent them running in horror. The young boy lay on the bed, his throat slashed so deeply he was nearly decapitated. Blood soaked the bedding and carpet, and sitting calmly nearby was Saritha, covered in her son's blood. Police arrived within minutes. Saritha didn't resist arrest. In fact, she immediately confessed. She told officers she had planned to kill her son. She had brought a knife with her to the hotel specifically for that purpose. She had waited until he was asleep, then slit his throat with such force that he died almost instantly. When investigators asked why she had done it, Saritha's answers were chilling and confusing. She rambled about financial problems, custody disputes with the boy's father, and her belief that her son would be better off dead than living in a troubled family situation. She claimed she had taken him to Disneyland to give him one last happy day before she killed him, a final gift before she took his life. Detectives were stunned by her matter-of-fact demeanor. There was no hysteria, no breakdown, no apparent remorse. She described the murder as if she were describing any other daily task. Psychologists later noted this flat affect was consistent with severe mental illness or psychopathy. The investigation revealed that Saritha had been involved in a contentious custody dispute with her ex-husband. The boy had been splitting time between both parents, and Saritha apparently felt she was losing control. Text messages recovered from her phone showed she had been increasingly paranoid, believing her ex-husband was turning their son against her. In her distorted thinking, if she couldn't have her son, no one would. The day at Disneyland appeared to have been calculated. She spent money she claimed she didn't have, taking her son on rides, buying him treats, creating memories, all while knowing she planned to murder him that night. Witnesses at the theme park described them as seeming happy and normal, with no indication of what was to come. That evening, after they returned to the hotel, Saritha let her son watch television and play on his tablet. She ordered room service for dinner. She acted like a caring mother right up until the moment she retrieved the knife she had hidden in her bag. Saritha Ramaraju was arrested and charged with first-degree murder with special circumstances and use of a deadly weapon. The prosecution argued this was a premeditated murder, evidenced by the planning, the purchase of the knife, and her own confession. The defense attempted to mount an insanity plea, arguing that Saritha was suffering from severe mental illness at the time of the murder and didn't understand the nature of her actions. They pointed to her bizarre statements, her flat emotional response, and a history of mental health issues. But the prosecution countered that Saritha's actions showed clear planning and awareness. She knew what she was doing. She had the capacity to take her son to Disneyland and act normal all day. She had the wherewithal to hide her intentions and wait until he was asleep. She understood that what she was doing was wrong. She just didn't care. The case went to trial in October 2024. Witnesses included hotel staff who discovered the body, police officers who arrested Saritha, forensic experts who examined the crime scene, and mental health professionals who evaluated the defendant. The most heart-wrenching testimony came from the boy's father, who described his son as a bright, energetic child who loved sports, video games, and spending time with his friends. He spoke about the custody arrangement and admitted there had been conflicts with Saritha, but he never imagined she would harm their son. The jury deliberated for 2 days before returning with a guilty verdict on all counts. They rejected the insanity defense, finding that while Saritha may have had mental health issues, she understood what she was doing and was capable of forming the intent to kill. In January 2025, Saritha Ramaraju was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge called her actions particularly heinous, noting that she had robbed her son of his life after giving him a day of happiness, making the betrayal even more cruel. During sentencing, family members submitted victim impact statements. The boy's father spoke about the permanent hole left in his life. Teachers from the boys' school described a student with potential and promise. Friends' parents talked about a kind child who was always welcome in their homes. All of those relationships, all of that potential, all of that future, erased in a moment of maternal violence. Saritha showed no emotion during sentencing. Even as the judge handed down a life sentence, her face remained blank. Some observers found this lack of response more disturbing than if she had shown anger or remorse. The case received significant media attention, particularly because of the Disneyland connection. It raised questions about how a mother could plan such violence while simultaneously creating happy memories with her victim. Psychologists call this compartmentalization, the ability to separate different aspects of one's thinking and behavior. For the boy's family and friends, the Disneyland trip now serves as a painful reminder. What should have been a happy memory became the prelude to tragedy. Today, Saritha Ramaraju is incarcerated in the California women's prison system. Her son rests in a cemetery in Southern California, his grave marked with the years he lived, only 11 of them, and tributes from family and friends who will never forget him. Please consider liking this video and subscribing to True Crime Silent Files. Share your respectful comments below and help us continue to tell these important stories that honor victims and shed light on these tragedies. Case 6, Kelle and Brassart. August 24, 2020, Turlock, California, Stanislaus County. The summer of 2020 was a time of upheaval across California. The pandemic had forced people into their homes, disrupted normal routines, and created unprecedented stress for families. But what happened in Turlock on August 24th of that year had nothing to do with COVID-19 and everything to do with negligence, intoxication, and a mother's fatal disregard for her child's safety. Kelle Brassart was at home that afternoon with her 2-year-old daughter, Eva. It was a hot California day, and the toddler was excited to play outside. The family had a backyard pool, a common feature in Central California homes where temperatures regularly soar above 100 degrees. But this pool didn't have proper safety barriers, and Kelle Brassart was distracted by something that, to her, seemed more important than watching her daughter, dating apps on her phone. Kelle was on probation for a previous child abuse case involving the same daughter. She had been ordered to maintain sobriety and properly supervise her children. But on this August afternoon, She was intoxicated and scrolling through dating profiles while her 2-year-old played unsupervised. At some point in the early afternoon, little Eva wandered toward the pool. With no adult watching and no physical barrier to stop her, the toddler fell into the water. Children that age don't have the swimming skills or the strength to save themselves. They can drown in minutes, silently, without the splashing and calling for help that adults associate with drowning. By the time Kelle realized something was wrong, it was too late. Emergency responders arrived to find Kelle performing CPR on her daughter, but Eva was already gone. She was transported to a local hospital where she was pronounced dead. The official cause of death was drowning. Initially, it appeared to be a tragic accident, the kind of preventable death that haunts parents and communities. But as investigators looked deeper, they discovered a pattern of negligence that turned tragedy into a criminal case. Police found evidence that Kelle had been drinking heavily that afternoon. Empty alcohol containers were found in the home. Toxicology tests confirmed she was intoxicated. Her phone records showed she had been actively using dating apps for hours, barely looking up to check on her daughter. Neighbors told investigators they had previously seen Kelle drinking and leaving her children unsupervised. Some had even called Child Protective Services out of concern, but those reports hadn't led to the child's removal from the home. Most damning was the discovery of Kelle's prior child abuse case. Just months earlier, she had been convicted of child endangerment involving Eva and placed on probation. The terms of her probation explicitly required her to supervise her children and refrain from alcohol use. She had violated both conditions on the day of her daughter's death. Prosecutors charged Kelle and Brassart with second-degree murder, arguing that her conduct showed implied malice, a reckless disregard for human life. Under California law, a person can be convicted of murder if their actions are so dangerous and show such indifference to life that death is a likely result, even if they didn't intend to kill. The prosecution's theory was straightforward. Kelle knew the pool was dangerous. She knew her daughter could drown. She was on probation for previous child endangerment. She had been explicitly ordered to supervise her children and stay sober. Instead, she got drunk and ignored her daughter for hours. When Eva died as a predictable result, that constituted murder. The defense argued it was a terrible accident, not a crime. They claimed Kelle loved her daughter and that addiction had clouded her judgment. They pointed to her attempts at CPR as evidence she didn't want her child to die. But the jury wasn't convinced. In March 2022, after a trial that included testimony from first responders, neighbors, and child safety experts, Kelle and Brassart was convicted of second-degree murder. The verdict sent a message. Parents who are so reckless and negligent that their children die can face murder charges, not just manslaughter or negligence. During the sentencing phase, the courtroom heard victim impact statements from Eva's family members. Eva's father spoke about his daughter's short life, her bright personality, and the future she would never have. He described the pain of losing a child to preventable negligence. Photographs shown in court depicted Eva as a smiling, happy toddler with curly hair and bright eyes, a little girl who loved playing outside, singing songs, and spending time with her family. Her life had barely begun when it ended in that backyard pool. In May 2022, Judge Michael Garfinkel sentenced Kelle and Brassart to 15 years to life in prison. In his sentencing remarks, the judge noted that Kelle had been given multiple chances to change her behavior. She had been warned, counseled, and placed on probation. But she had chosen her addictions and distractions over her daughter's safety, and Eva paid with her life. The case highlighted the dangers of unsupervised pools and the importance of multiple layers of protection for young children. Child safety advocates used Eva's death to push for stricter pool safety regulations, including mandatory fencing, alarms, and pool covers. But beyond the safety lessons, The case was a stark reminder of maternal neglect. Kelle and Brassart had been given the precious gift of a child and the responsibility to protect her. Instead, she prioritized her phone, her dating apps, and her desire for alcohol over her daughter's life. 2-year-old Eva Brassart is buried in a cemetery in Turlock. Her grave is marked with toys and flowers left by family members who still grieve her loss. She would have started kindergarten in 2023. Instead, her life ended before it really began. Kelle Ann Brassart remains incarcerated in the California women's prison system. She will be eligible for parole after serving 15 years, but even if released, she will carry the weight of her daughter's death for the rest of her life. If you're finding these stories important and want to see more content like this, please like this video, subscribe to True Crime Silent Files, and leave your respectful thoughts in the comments below. Your engagement matters and helps us continue this important work. Case 7. Destiny Luckie Harrison. June 14, 2023. Linwood, California, Los Angeles County. The welfare check seemed routine at first. Concerned family members hadn't been able to reach the Harrison household in Linwood and asked police to stop by. Officers arrived at the residence on June 14, 2023, expecting to find a family that had simply been out of touch. What they found instead was a scene of horror that would haunt even experienced investigators. Inside the home, police discovered 8-year-old Tatiana Harrison's body stuffed inside a cooler in the corner of a bedroom. The child had been dead for some time, and the evidence of abuse was immediate and overwhelming. Her small body bore signs of prolonged torture, burns, bruises, malnutrition, and injuries consistent with repeated beatings. This wasn't a sudden tragedy. This was systematic abuse that had ended in murder, and the child's own mother, Destiny Luckie Harrison, was at the center of it. As detectives investigated, they uncovered a nightmare that had been unfolding for months inside the Linwood home. Tatiana had been subjected to horrific abuse by multiple adults in the household, including her mother Destiny, Destiny's boyfriend, and other family members who lived there. Witnesses and evidence revealed that Tatiana had been beaten with extension cords, belts, and other objects. She had been burned with hot water and other instruments. She was denied food for days at a time as punishment. She was forced to stand in stress positions for hours. She was isolated from the other children in the home and treated as a scapegoat for the household's dysfunction. The abuse escalated in the weeks before her death. Tatiana had become so weak from malnutrition and repeated injuries that she could barely stand. Instead of seeking medical help, the adults in the home continued to punish her, blaming her for being difficult and disobedient. When Tatiana finally died from her injuries, Destiny and the other adults didn't call for help. They didn't report her death. Instead, they placed her body in a cooler, hid it in a bedroom, and continued with their lives as if nothing had happened. The other children in the home were witnesses to Tatiana's torture and death. They had been threatened and told never to speak about what was happening to their sister. Some had even been forced to participate in the abuse, a common tactic used by family abusers to ensure silence and spread culpability. When police interviewed the surviving children after Tatiana's body was discovered, they described a household ruled by fear and violence. Destiny was portrayed as a volatile, cruel woman who showed favoritism to some children while targeting others, particularly Tatiana, for extreme abuse. The children's accounts were corroborated by forensic evidence. The cooler where Tatiana's body was found contained DNA evidence. The home showed signs of repeated violence. Medical examiners determined that Tatiana had suffered dozens of injuries over an extended period before her death. Destiny Luckie Harrison was arrested along with her boyfriend and other adults who lived in the home. All were charged with murder, torture, and multiple counts of child abuse and endangerment. The prosecution's case was overwhelming. They presented medical testimony about Tatiana's injuries and how they had been inflicted over time. They introduced statements from the surviving children. They showed photographs of the crime scene and of Tatiana's body that were so disturbing the jury was visibly affected. The defense attempted to argue that Destiny had been under the influence of her boyfriend and others in the home, that she had been coerced into participating in the abuse, but the evidence showed otherwise. Witnesses testified that Destiny had often been the instigator of the violence. She had been the one to deny Tatiana food. She had been the one to decide punishments. In December 2023, Destiny Luckie Harrison was convicted of first-degree murder with special circumstances of torture, along with multiple counts of child abuse. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. At sentencing in February 2024, the judge addressed Destiny directly, calling her actions a complete betrayal of the mother-child relationship. The judge noted that Tatiana had been utterly defenseless, trapped in a home with people who should have protected her, but instead tortured her to death. Destiny was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Her boyfriend and the other adults charged in connection with Tatiana's death received sentences ranging from 15 years to life, depending on their level of involvement. During the trial, prosecutors revealed that there had been warning signs. Teachers at Tatiana's school had noticed she was often absent, and when she did attend, she appeared malnourished and had visible injuries. Reports had been made to Child Protective Services, but they hadn't led to intervention before it was too late. The case sparked outrage in Los Angeles County and renewed discussions about how to better protect children from abuse. Tatiana's death was another in a series of high-profile child abuse cases in the region, and advocates demanded systemic reform. But for Tatiana, any reforms came too late. She died at age 8, having known more pain and suffering than most people experience in a lifetime. Her short life was marked by betrayal, violence, and ultimately murder at the hands of the person who should have loved and protected her most. Family members who hadn't been living in the home expressed shock and grief. They said they hadn't known the extent of the abuse, that Destiny had hidden it from them. They established a memorial fund in Tatiana's name to support child abuse prevention efforts. Tatiana is buried in a cemetery in Los Angeles County. Her grave is marked with stuffed animals, flowers, and messages from people who never knew her but were moved by her story. Every year on her birthday, community members gather at her grave to remember her and to recommit to protecting children from abuse. Destiny Luckie Harrison remains incarcerated in the California women's prison system. She is housed in protective custody, as inmates who harm children face violence from other prisoners. She will never be released, spending the rest of her life behind bars for the torture and murder of her daughter. The surviving children from the Harrison household were placed in foster care and are receiving extensive therapy and support. But they will carry the trauma of what they witnessed and experienced for the rest of their lives. They lost their sister, and in many ways, they lost their childhood. Tatiana's case serves as a grim reminder that child abuse often happens behind closed doors. In homes that may appear normal from the outside, it underscores the importance of vigilance, of taking reports seriously, and of acting swiftly when children are at risk. If these stories are affecting you and you want to help ensure victims like Tatiana are never forgotten, please like this video, subscribe to True Crime Silent Files, and share your respectful thoughts in the comments below. Your engagement helps us continue this important work. Case 8. Pietrasile Ortiz. September 27, 2017. La Grande, California, Merced County. In the small Central California community of La Grande, population just over 2,000, everyone knew everyone. It was the kind of place where neighbors looked out for each other, where children played in the streets, and where violence was rare. That sense of safety was shattered on September 27th, 2017, when police responded to a residence and found 3 children dead and their mother, Patricia Ortiz, barely clinging to life after an apparent suicide attempt. The children, 5-year-old Christopher, 3-year-old Xenia, and 18-month-old Giovanni, had been killed by their own mother. Patricia had taken their lives before attempting to take her own. Emergency responders worked frantically to save Patricia, and she survived. As she recovered in the hospital under police guard, investigators began piecing together what had happened in that house and why a mother would murder her 3 young children. The crime scene told a story of premeditation and desperation. Patricia had methodically killed each of her children, though the exact method was kept from public records to protect the dignity of the victims. What was clear was that this wasn't an impulsive act. It had been planned. Patricia's family and friends were in shock. They described her as a devoted mother who loved her children. But as investigators dug deeper, they discovered that Patricia had been struggling with severe depression and anxiety. Her relationship with the children's father had deteriorated. She was facing financial difficulties. She felt overwhelmed and isolated. In the weeks before the murders, Patricia had made concerning statements to family members about feeling hopeless and trapped. She had expressed fears about losing her children or not being able to provide for them. But no one realized how serious her mental state had become. On the morning of September 27th, Patricia sent her older children off to school. Once they were gone, she was alone with Christopher, Xenia, and Giovanni. At some point that day, she made the decision to kill them and herself. Her reasoning, as she later explained to investigators, was twisted by depression and distorted thinking. She believed her children would be better off dead than living in poverty or potentially being taken away from her. She thought she was saving them from future suffering by ending their lives. This type of reasoning is characteristic of what psychologists call altruistic filicide, when a parent kills their children believing they are acting in the children's best interest. It's most common in cases involving severe mental illness, particularly depression with psychotic features. Patricia was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder. The prosecution argued that despite her mental health issues, she had the capacity to understand what she was doing and to plan the murders. The methodical nature of the killings and her suicide attempt afterward showed intent and awareness. The defense mounted an insanity plea, arguing that Patricia had been suffering from severe postpartum depression that had never been properly treated, combined with other mental health issues. They presented evidence of her psychiatric history, testimony from mental health experts, and statements from family members about changes in her behavior. The case was complicated by the fact that Patricia had been capable of appearing normal to outsiders even as her mental state deteriorated. She had continued to care for her children's basic needs, take them to appointments, and interact with neighbors. This made it difficult to argue she was completely detached from reality. The trial was emotionally devastating for the community. La Grande was a tight-knit town, and the Ortiz family was known to many residents. The idea that a mother could kill her 3 bobbies was almost incomprehensible. Witnesses testified about the children's personalities and potential. Christopher had been starting kindergarten and was excited about learning to read. Xenia loved to sing and dance. Giovanni was just beginning to walk and talk. All 3 had their whole lives ahead of them. In June 2018, Patricia Ortiz was convicted on all 3 counts of first-degree murder. The jury rejected the insanity defense, finding that while Patricia had mental health issues, she understood the nature of her actions and knew they were wrong. The judge sentenced Patricia to 3 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. During sentencing, the judge acknowledged Patricia's mental health struggles, but emphasized that she had made a choice that ended 3 innocent lives. Patricia showed emotion during the sentencing, crying and expressing remorse for what she had done. She told the court that not a day went by that she didn't regret her actions, that she would give anything to bring her children back. But the judge noted that remorse, while significant, couldn't undo the harm she had caused. The case raised important questions about maternal mental health, particularly in low-income communities where access to mental health services is limited. Advocates pointed to Patricia's case as an example of what can happen when mental illness goes untreated and when parents don't have adequate support systems. Some argued that Patricia should have received more help rather than a life sentence. Others maintained that, regardless of mental illness, she had made a choice to murder her children and must be held accountable. The children's father, who had been separated from Patricia at the time of the murders, spoke at the sentencing about his loss. He described the pain of losing all three of his young children at once, of never being able to watch them grow up, of having his entire future stolen from him. Christopher, Xenia, and Giovanni Ortiz are buried together in a cemetery in Merced County. Their grave is marked with a large headstone bearing their names and images of angels, a tribute to three children whose lives were cut tragically short. Patricia Ortiz remains incarcerated in the California women's prison system. She has reportedly participated in mental health treatment programs and has expressed ongoing remorse for her actions. But she will never be released, spending the rest of her life in prison for murdering her three children. The community of La Grande has struggled to heal from this tragedy. A memorial was established at the local park in honor of the three children. Each year, on the anniversary of their deaths, community members gather to remember them and to advocate for better mental health resources for parents. The case serves as a somber reminder that maternal mental health is a serious issue that requires attention, support, and treatment. But it also reminds us that even in cases involving mental illness, accountability matters, and three children lost their lives to maternal violence. Please take a moment to like this video if you're finding value in these important stories. Subscribe to True Crime Silent Files and share your respectful comments below. These victims deserve to be remembered, and your engagement helps us honor their memories. Case 9, Eluciarociarare. February 23, 2015, Santa Ana, California, Orange County. The case of Lucero Carrera is one of the most legally complex and controversial maternal infanticide cases in California history. What happened on February 23, 2015, in a Santa Ana apartment has been the subject of multiple trials, legal debates, and questions about mental illness, intent, and justice. On that February afternoon, emergency responders received a frantic call from Lucero Carrera. She reported that her infant daughter, Bella, was not breathing. When paramedics arrived, they found the 6-month-old baby unresponsive in a bathtub filled with water. Bella was rushed to the hospital but could not be revived. She was pronounced dead, and the preliminary cause of death was drowning. At first, Lucero told investigators that she had left Bella in the bathtub for just a moment to answer the phone, and when she returned, the baby had slipped under the water. She claimed it was a terrible accident, a momentary lapse in supervision that led to tragedy. But investigators were suspicious. 6-month-old bobbies cannot sit up on their own in a bathtub. The water level was high, too high to be safe for an infant, and Lucero's story had inconsistencies that didn't add up. As detectives pressed her, Lucero's story began to change. She eventually admitted that she had intentionally held Bella under the water. She said she had been overwhelmed, depressed, and heard voices telling her to drown her daughter. She described feeling like she was in a fog, not fully in control of her actions. Lucero was arrested and charged with first-degree murder with special circumstances. The prosecution's theory was that this was an intentional killing, regardless of Lucero's claims of mental illness. But the case was far from straightforward. Lucero's defense team presented evidence of severe mental illness. She had a documented history of depression and psychosis. She had been prescribed psychiatric medications but had stopped taking them. Family members testified that they had noticed concerning changes in her behavior in the weeks before Bella's death. Mental health experts who evaluated Lucero diagnosed her with postpartum psychosis, a rare but serious mental health condition that can occur after childbirth. Women with postpartum psychosis can experience hallucinations, delusions, paranoia, and a complete break from reality. In extreme cases, they can harm their children while in a psychotic state. The first trial ended in a mistrial when jurors couldn't agree on a verdict. Some believed Lucero had been legally insane at the time of the killing and couldn't form the intent necessary for murder. Others believed she knew what she was doing and should be convicted. The second trial resulted in a similar outcome, another mistrial. The legal question of whether Lucero was insane or simply suffering from mental illness that diminished her capacity became the central issue. In California, the legal standard for insanity is whether the defendant understood the nature of their actions and knew they were wrong. Lucero's defense argued she didn't meet this standard, that her psychosis was so severe she was completely detached from reality. The prosecution countered that Lucero had shown consciousness of guilt. She had initially lied to police about what happened. She had changed her story multiple times. These actions suggested she knew drowning her daughter was wrong, even if she was mentally ill at the time. After multiple legal proceedings spanning several years, Lucero Carrera was ultimately found not guilty by reason of insanity. The court determined that her postpartum psychosis was so severe at the time of Bella's death that she could not be held criminally responsible in the traditional sense. However, this didn't mean Lucero went free. Instead, she was committed to a state psychiatric hospital for treatment. She would remain there until mental health professionals determined she was no longer a danger to herself or others, a process that could take years or even decades. The verdict was controversial. Some believed justice had been served by recognizing the role of mental illness in Bella's death. Others felt that a mother who drowned her infant should be in prison, regardless of her mental state. The case highlighted the complex intersection of maternal mental health, criminal law, and infanticide. Postpartum psychosis affects approximately 1 to 2 out of every 1,000 new mothers. When left untreated, it can lead to tragic outcomes. Child welfare advocates used Bella's case to push for better screening and treatment of postpartum mental health issues. They argued that tragedies like this could be prevented with proper identification and intervention. But for Bella's family, particularly her father, who had lost his daughter, no verdict could bring her back. He spoke about the pain of losing his baby girl, of never getting to see her grow up, of having her life stolen before it really began. Bella Carrera is buried in a cemetery in Orange County. Her grave is marked with flowers, stuffed animals, and a small headstone bearing her name and dates, 6 short months of life. Lucero Carrera remains in a state psychiatric facility as of 2025, continuing to receive treatment for her mental illness. The question of whether she will ever be released remains open, dependent on her progress in treatment and assessments of her mental state. The case serves as a reminder of the devastating consequences that can result when severe maternal mental illness goes untreated. It raises difficult questions about accountability, mental health, and how society should respond when a mother kills her child while experiencing psychosis. For some, Lucero is a woman who needs treatment, not punishment, a mother whose illness led to an unthinkable tragedy. For others, she is a killer who took an innocent life and must be kept from society. The only thing everyone can agree on is that Bella's death was a tragedy that should never have happened, and that better mental health care for new mothers could prevent similar cases in the future. If you're finding these stories important and want to continue supporting this content, please like this video, subscribe to True Crime Silent Files, and leave your respectful thoughts in the comments below. Your engagement matters and helps us tell these difficult but important stories. Case 10, Minazari. March 9, 2022, Modesto, California, Stanislaus County. The final case in our examination of California's most evil mothers takes us to Modesto, in the Central Valley, where a mother's actions shocked even seasoned investigators who thought they had seen everything. On March 9, 2022, police in Modesto received a call about a possible child abuse situation at a residence in a quiet residential neighborhood. When officers arrived and made contact with Mina Nazari, they immediately suspected something was very wrong. Mina's behavior was erratic, and her explanations for the visible injuries on one of her children were inconsistent and implausible. Officers requested to see all of the children in the home, and what they discovered led to immediate intervention. One of Mina's young daughters, age 7, showed signs of severe physical abuse and neglect. She was significantly underweight, had multiple injuries in various stages of healing, and displayed clear signs of trauma. The child was terrified and could barely speak. Mina's other child, a younger daughter, also showed signs of abuse, but to a lesser extent. It became clear that Mina had been targeting her older daughter for particularly severe mistreatment. The 7-year-old was immediately taken to the hospital, where medical professionals documented extensive injuries consistent with prolonged abuse. She had been beaten, burned, and denied adequate food and care. She had untreated medical issues and showed signs of developmental delays likely caused by trauma and neglect. As investigators dug into the case, they uncovered a pattern of abuse that had been ongoing for years. Neighbors reported sometimes hearing screaming from the home, but hadn't realized the severity of what was happening. The children had been kept isolated, rarely allowed outside or to interact with others. Mina had homeschooled the children, which meant they weren't in regular contact with teachers or other mandated reporters who might have identified and reported the abuse. This isolation allowed the abuse to continue unchecked. The investigation revealed that Mina had subjected her older daughter to cruel and unusual punishments. She had locked the child in closets for extended periods. She had denied her food as punishment for minor infractions. She had beaten her with various objects. She had subjected her to psychological torture, telling her she was worthless and unloved. When interviewed, Mina showed no remorse for her treatment of her daughter. She blamed the child for being difficult and requiring harsh discipline. She justified her actions as necessary parenting, showing a complete lack of insight into the severity of the abuse. Mina Nazari was arrested and charged with multiple counts including torture, child abuse causing great bodily injury, child endangerment, and attempted murder. The attempted murder charge stemmed from incidents where Mina's abuse had been so severe that prosecutors believed she had acted with a willful disregard for her daughter's life. The prosecution's case was built on medical evidence, testimony from the children, statements from neighbors and family members, and documentation of the conditions in which the children had been living. The defense attempted to argue that Mina had been struggling with mental health issues and had been overwhelmed by the challenges of parenting. They presented evidence of her own difficult childhood and trauma history. But the prosecution emphasized that while Mina may have had her own struggles, she had made deliberate choices to torture and abuse her daughter. The targeting of one child while treating the other somewhat better showed intentionality, not simply a parent losing control. The trial took place in late 2022. Witnesses testified about the horrific abuse the 7-year-old had endured. Medical experts explained the child's injuries and the long-term physical and psychological damage she would likely experience. The most powerful testimony came from the child herself, who bravely took the stand to describe what her mother had done to her. Though young and clearly traumatized, she was able to tell her story, giving the jury a direct window into the abuse she had suffered. In January 2023, Mina Nazari was convicted on all counts. The jury found her guilty of torture, multiple counts of child abuse, and attempted murder. They determined that her actions had been willful, deliberate, and showed a depraved indifference to her daughter's life and well-being. At sentencing in March 2023, the judge handed down a harsh sentence reflecting the severity of Mina's crimes. She was sentenced to 32 years to life in prison, with the possibility of parole only after serving the full 32 years. Given her age, this essentially amounted to a life sentence. The judge noted during sentencing that Mina had been given the precious responsibility of caring for her children and had instead tortured them. The judge emphasized that the victim in this case was a helpless child who had depended entirely on her mother for survival, and that mother had betrayed her in the worst possible way. Mina showed no emotion during sentencing, maintaining the same detached demeanor she had displayed throughout the trial. This lack of remorse was noted by the judge as an aggravating factor. The two children were placed in foster care and are now being raised in a safe, loving environment. The older daughter, the primary victim, is receiving extensive therapy and medical care. She faces a long road to recovery, but child psychologists working with her report that she is resilient and making progress. The younger daughter is also receiving support and counseling. While she experienced less severe abuse than her sister, she witnessed terrible things and carries her own trauma. The case highlighted the dangers of educational isolation, when children are homeschooled or otherwise kept away from regular contact, with mandated reporters who might identify abuse. Child advocates used Mina's case to call for better oversight of homeschooling situations and more robust welfare checks on isolated children. The community of Modesto was shocked by the case. It was a reminder that severe child abuse can happen anywhere, in any neighborhood, behind closed doors where no one can see. Mina Nazari is currently incarcerated in the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla. She will not be eligible for parole until 2055, when she will be in her 70s. If she is ever released, she will be prohibited from having any contact with her daughters or any other minors. Her older daughter, now thriving in foster care, is learning what it means to be safe, to be cared for, and to be loved, things every child deserves but that were denied to her for the first 7 years of her life. The girl's foster family has said she still has nightmares and struggles with trust, but she's also learning to laugh, to play, and to be a child. She's attending school for the first time and discovering she's smart and capable, the opposite of everything her mother told her. Mina Nazari's case serves as the final example in our examination of California's most evil mothers, women who took the sacred trust of motherhood and twisted it into something dark and violent. Her story, like the others we've examined, reminds us that evil can wear any face, even that of a mother. As the final details came to light, one truth became impossible to ignore. These cases did not always begin with violence, but they all ended in silence. A silence that still echoes through the lives left behind. We've examined 10 cases of mothers who committed unspeakable acts against their own children here in California. From Palmdale to Modesto, from Los Angeles County to the Central Valley, these tragedies occurred across our state, affecting families from all backgrounds and communities. These cases force us to confront uncomfortable truths. They challenge our assumptions about motherhood and maternal instinct. They remind us that mental illness, when untreated, can lead to tragedy. They show us the devastating consequences of child welfare system failures, and they demonstrate that evil is not always obvious or easy to identify. But these cases also teach us important lessons. They highlight the need for vigilance in protecting children. They underscore the importance of taking abuse reports seriously and acting swiftly. They remind us that maternal mental health is a critical issue that requires attention and resources. And they show us that justice, while it cannot undo harm, serves an important purpose in holding offenders accountable and protecting society. Each of the victims we discussed today, Gabriel Fernandez, Susan and Sheila Knorr, the three Caro brothers Anthony Avalos, the young son of Saritha Ramaraju, little Eva Brassart, Tatiana Harrison, the three Ortiz children, baby Bella Carrera, and the daughter of Mina Nazari, deserves to be remembered not just as a victim, but as a child with potential, with personality, with a life that mattered. Their stories have driven reforms, inspired legislation, and motivated advocates to fight for better protection of children. In that sense, their short lives continue to have meaning and impact. If you or someone you know is struggling with thoughts of harming a child, please reach out for help immediately. Help is available, and tragedies can be prevented. Thank you for watching this documentary on True Crime Silent Files. I know this content was difficult, but these stories need to be told. These victims need to be remembered, and we all need to be reminded of our collective responsibility to protect children. Please like this video if you found it valuable. Subscribe to True Crime Silent Files for more in-depth true crime documentaries. Leave your respectful thoughts and comments below. I read every one of them. Share this video with others who appreciate thoughtful true crime content. Remember, awareness is the first step toward change. By educating ourselves about these cases, we honor the victims and commit to building a safer world for children. Until next time, stay safe, stay vigilant, and never stop speaking up for those who cannot speak for themselves. This has been True Crime Silent Files.